Soy Montserrat Peidró y estáis viendo PackSite Live.
PackSite Pro Services really gets to act as an extension of your team. So when you come across a new deployment and you need help, don't have the bandwidth or the expertise to do the project, this is where we can jump in and help along the way.
Enable our partners' growth through scalable and repeatable implementation and technical services.
Taking the partners on their growth journey.
We can really help a partner that's doing a particular kind of project for the first time by working through it with them.
We make it as easy as possible, and typically this is through a one-touch click into our cloud commerce marketplace.
Our services are repeatable. They are fixed scope. There's no unpredictability.
We look to take what is sometimes complex technology solutions, and we essentially make it simple for our partners to leverage those different tools through our package offerings, so that we can come in and work as an extension to your team and deliver those solutions to your customers.
We have the expertise to be able to take on project work for you if you just don't have the bandwidth for it right now, or we can teach you how to do it.
And that's where PackSite Academy comes in. We've got programs that help the partner in the way they want to learn. We've got all this free on-demand content.
We have a number of subject matter experts keeping up to speed with the latest developments and enhancements, features and functionality.
There's always going to be vendors added, and if it has our approval, that means it's going to serve you.
If you're interested in learning more, simply check out the PackSite Professional Services Engagement SKU in the PackSite Marketplace at no cost, and our team will be in touch.
Help propel your business forward right out of the cloud commerce marketplace at PackSite.
What's up, everyone? Happy Wednesday, and welcome to the game on PackSite Live, the show where we talk about all the cybersecurity shenanigans you need to be aware of. We've got a really great show. Wayne Selk is coming back from CompTIA, and we're going to talk Trustmark a little more. How has this program evolved, especially as it started to get off the ground? There should be some really cool stuff there, but more importantly, we're going to broaden it out and talk about the value and the reasons behind getting and completing a cybersecurity assessment at all, or business assessment at all. So that should be a great show. Before we dive in, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, all of that fun stuff. If you want to comment, you're free to comment anywhere, but you're going to get the best results if you do it on YouTube. That's youtube.com/PackSiteCloud, because then our production team can actually see your comment, put it up on the screen for everyone to see, and we can interact that way. Don't forget to sign up for PackSite Beyond, and we're creeping up real quick on Security Bootcamp in Phoenix. I think it's in about, 2 weeks now? 2-3 weeks, something like that. And you're going to want to go there. We're doing a lot of stuff. I'm actually at the office today picking up some equipment to set up some cool demos for you guys, and we'll see what happens to them, when we configure them in securely. So but that's enough. Let's bring in Matt and get the show started.
Man, Dom, I am super excited and nervous for Security Bootcamp for a number of reasons. We're trying something completely different. We're hoping to make it fun. I will announce that we added the personality of Eric Torres to the mix to fill in for Dom. So I'm super excited about that. But yeah, the other thing, I'm fairly always excited, so I guess it's hard to tell the tonality delineations in my excitement. But I'm really, really excited to have Wayne Selk on for a number of reasons. One being, that is probably one of the only humans that I've never won an argument with. I actually don't know that I could state that out. I don't get into many of them with him, but every time he's talked me off a ledge rather than the other direction. So I like to keep those type of humans around me, and I'm very excited about that. And we'll get in maybe to what that is if you refer back to the Trustmark stuff from earlier. And secondarily, it's because we are heading towards standards, y'all. Everybody sitting here listening has wanted to do this. You may not understand that you have, but you've wanted to go towards standards. And if you've ever said, well, that trunk slammer that sells for... It's because we don't have standards. We can be anything we want to be. Let's start defining those. If you're not part of that movement, if you're not part of that journey, this is the show to watch today with Wayne Selk, because he's going to help show some of those very, very basic examples to demystify the terror of this. to just get started where you are. One of those principal arguments I have lost with Wayne, which is we will let people pass with what they need to start from, not where they need to be, and continue to escalate and ask them to be better as they continue to grow. And we'll go through some of that today. Dom, I'm just excited to be here. I don't know if you have any other thoughts to open it with.
It's going to be a great show. But yeah, remember, if there's no standard, then anyone can start an MSP tomorrow and kill their neighbor's business. So this is really important stuff, right? It's not standards for the sake of standards. It's standards for the sake of 40-some-odd% of the GDP continuing to exist. So let's hear some words from Robin, and then hurry up and get Wayne in here and talk about it.
Are you ready?
Let's talk about risk assessments. Risk assessments, it's something companies should do at least annually and when you have major changes. And the thing is, you cannot mitigate a risk if you don't know it exists. And a lot of times people don't recognize they have gaps, like gaping holes, chasms within their business, because they've never actually evaluated where their risks are and where they're more vulnerable to something being exploited. So in ISO, in the world of ISO, if you're going through SOC 2 or any of these standards, risk assessments are part of your business. They're an operational activity, and like I say, it needs to be done at least annually. And you need to have some kind of system of understanding how you're going to assess the risk, what you need to assess risk against, what are your critical assets, where are your critical data, what are your critical integrations, what happens when certain things go down, what's the risk of something go down, if something goes down, can you recover quickly? All of this information becomes more available to you when you do a proper risk assessment. And doing a risk assessment, that's a skill. It's not something you're just going to wake up and be like, oh, I'm going to do a risk assessment, and you've never done it before. So this is why I'm going to recommend Udemy has a really, really, really good class on risk assessment, and it's based on ISO 31000. It's actually a college level class, but this particular individual, he has put it onto a Udemy platform. And I'm thinking this is really someone who is so passionate about the whole concept of risk that it's really a gift. But I would not pay full price for it. Wait till it's on sale and get that class and go through it, because it's going to give you some real life scenarios of what a true risk assessment does, what it can do for your business, how to do it properly. When you think about how we handle our personal lives, there are certain regions now that are just dealing with inclement weather and all kinds of different things. Those are risks. But imagine if they didn't prepare for those. They just did this and pretended like, yeah, we don't get hurricanes. Yeah, we don't get mudslides. No, yeah, we don't get fires. And they did not put certain contingencies in place. They didn't have the insurance. They didn't have certain things in place to weather a disruption. In your business, there are risks. In our personal lives, there are risks. And the more prepared we are to evaluate those risks and just make some intelligent decisions, should I mitigate this? Should I just consider it later? Should I transfer it? One of the ways you transfer risk is maybe like with insurance or outsourcing it to another company. But that's all part of your risk assessment process. And the good thing about it is it will also show you where you might be putting too much effort into something that is a risk, but it's not a high risk. And you might be actually investing too much time, too many resources, too much money mitigating something that's really a low risk. You want to invest your time, your effort, your energy, and your resources into identifying your higher risk items and then coming up with the contingencies for those high risk items. And again, I'm going to recommend the course on Udemy. It's very good, it's very entertaining, and it's very informative.
Level up.
Dr.
How
Selk.
you risk? Assess said risk, please.
Hey guys, thanks for having me back.
Yeah, man, you didn't wear out your welcome the first time, so we're glad to have you back. And it's awesome because we've had another almost year. You've done some assessments. We talked about Trustmark before and what's coming, and so I'm super excited to kind of, if nothing else, let's check in on what are you seeing, what are the themes you've seen, and then really one of the things that you always like to do, Wayne, is be positive, not negative. And so what we're looking for is, what are the wins you've seen, man? Like, what are the things where you're like, this one? So as we go through some of this conversation for y'all in the audience, please chime in on the YouTube channel for PAX 8. Dom Kirby's just put in the question for what questions do you have for Wayne, and we'll try to keep those coming. And Wayne, I'll just hand you the con. You have the con, my friend. Kick it off.
Hey, awesome. So thanks again. Thanks everyone for listening in and joining. Hopefully you find this informative and valuable, regardless of the framework standard that Matt Lee kind of alluded to during the intro. It's just going to help, right? It'll help you go through the process, I think, a little easier too. Let me start by Matt, Dom, if you guys don't mind. So a little history. I actually, when we launched the Trustmark program, I wanted to take on the first 10 assessments. And the reason for that, I have a background in doing so, just so everybody's aware. In case you didn't know, you can stop me on the street sometime and I'll fill you in on all that fun stuff. But I wanted to make sure that we had the right minimum standard set for each of the safeguards within the Trustmark, right? I did not want to have to wait for a third-party assessor to be able to define what that's going to be for the industry. And to, Matt, you kind of alluded to my thought here on how I think everybody needs to be successful, right, in achieving this overall objective. And that objective is creating or at least starting to create a foundational security program inside of their organization. And it doesn't matter the size, right? I mean, sure. we have folks going through the program. There's only one person, solopreneur. We have other organizations that are going through they have 150 employees. So, the goal isn't to bring this down to the end client right away. Our focus was really around the MSP space, right? Because if we can help the MSP be successful in understanding more around cybersecurity and the benefits that it brings for their organization,
yep,
we raise that knowledge and awareness, right? Awareness and understanding, you and I like to call it, and then you're having better conversations with your clients, right? And I know you and I talked about this too a couple of times in our recent past, but you know how a lot of folks get told no. And I think, no, I'm not doing that. Or wait, you just installed that firewall for me not even a year ago. Why do I need a new one today? Why do I have to now put in this EDR, MDR, XDR product set, right? We've all heard those rebuts come back from the client. And part of it is we're not having the right level of conversation. Right? Yeah. Truth be told, let's just be honest. Again, place of love, right? Place of love.
100%.
Very transparent with everybody. But so I wanted to do the first 10. As it turns out, I ended up doing a few more than that. I did 14. Matt and I chatted. We wanted to have kind of a tales from the assessor kind of thing. What are some of the things that I was seeing? What are some of the things the audience could actually take away and look at, review, enhance before they even start going down this process? And so I put together some things for you, for the audience, just some things I really think would help hammer home why things are important, right? And I
also want to add something else, Wayne, real quick, because you said something that made me think of an analogy of this. You said that going through it yourselves helps you better explain this to somebody else. And I'll take it back to anybody that's ever had a medical condition, a broken collarbone, lived with some type of food allergy or illness, or had some type of psychological disorder, or had a friend that had one. Once you've been through that and you meet another human that's going through that, you're like, bro, listen, you can use these gluten-free crackers. They're just amazing. There's this one place that like, you just are part of it. You understand it. You've been through it. You get it. You're near it. You can explain it. You feel like you're real. If you go in and sell cybersecurity products and services and don't have that feel of real, you won't be authentic. And I think that's the biggest thing you get from this is experiencing it yourself. To your point, and you're going next, which is understanding the why helps you go through that and seem authentic, right? And be authentic in that regard. So I just wanted to touch on that piece from an analogy perspective.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that. Because really, it is that authenticity piece, right? We wanna come across as being trusted, and if we're not, I'm going to use eat your own dog food or
drink your own champagne or whatever it might be.
Drink your own champagne, yeah. I mean, not all dog food is bad, by the way. Anyway, I'm going to.
I haven't done enough sample sizes there, Wayne.
but really, if the more we understand, and I don't want to say play around or test in our own environments,
sure.
But as we experience things inside of our own organization, we recognize what works. We will also recognize what doesn't work, what needs to change, and how we can improve our overall business structure. That is a benefit only you're going to get for your org. And to Matt's point, once you have that level of understanding, you then can talk from a position of more authoritative position with your client, customer, or prospect, because now you know exactly the positive, the negative, you know what could go right, what could go wrong, and you're just not winging it, right? And you can refine those processes, which is awesome, right? Because ultimately that's where we need to be. And the little spiel that was on right before we started around risk assessments, yes, completely 100% agree. There's a couple of different versions of risk assessments that folks need to do, because you do risk assessments every single day, I might add.
Sure.
They don't have to be formalized, right? But back to the assessments themselves. I think everybody has been very positive in the feedback. So let me walk you through how I performed the assessments. We now have a third-party accredited, CREST accredited assessor. I'm hand-holding right now, or helping them ride the bike, so that we don't have accidents or folks going off the rails. My approach to this is not a pass-fail. So for those of you that think that the Trustmark itself is a pass-fail, that is absolutely not true. It's not. It's a meets, does not meet, or partial meets. I will tell you there's also the very low probability for a not applicable. I have done one not applicable for a particular organization on one safeguard. One.
Because the more we talk, to know which one that is at some point. But we'll
I know. I'm not gonna. Right, because I'm not.
I'll look at it in the assessment review that we'll be doing, so it'll be okay.
That's right. So that's fine. Which will be anonymized for you, by the way. But in any case, we don't want any bias in there. But the overall assessment, I come at it from the position of, let's look and see how well you're doing today. Let's see what we can help you improve upon. And then where you have gaps, let's make recommendations for how you might be able to solve for that, right? And for those of you that may have gone through my risk management workshop or watched the videos online as part of the Trustmark program, if you haven't, I would strongly recommend that you do. The goal here is for you to uncover the things that you need to and work through your people first, then your process, and ultimately get to technology to solve for gaps if you cannot mitigate that risk with your people or your process first. You will hear that theme throughout the entire program. So I took sometimes I could get through an assessment in 10 man hours. That's not 10 straight hours because, oh my God, I'd lose my mind. So 10 hours overall. And I will tell you the first 2 to 2.5, sometimes 3 hours of doing that is reading nothing more than the policies, right?
Sure.
So the policies are important because, and you're going to hear this from me a little later on too, they set up everything else that you're doing inside of the organization.
Yeah.
And believe me, I could see the difference. Folks have policies written, but their implementation notes inside of the GRC platform, they didn't match. They didn't jive, right? They contradicted sometimes what was going on from a policy perspective. It doesn't mean it's a finding, by the way.
Sure.
I would just make a note of it. And so the safeguard that I'm referring to is PP1, PP.1, by the way. That cell object, because I work out a spreadsheet, it's a lot easier because I'm going back and forth between all kinds of stuff. That cell was always maxed out.
Sure.
On just about everybody, right? Which was kind of interesting. So I would read through policy. I would help them tune their policies, and if there was contradiction between one policy to another, I would point that out. So the first thing I want to share with everybody, and this is all going to be positive. This isn't a negative. Please make sure that your policies are all formatted the exact same way, right? Yeah. Regardless of the assessment you're going through, I don't care if it's NIST Cybersecurity Framework 171, CMMC, ISO 27000, pick a flavor. Make sure that they're all formatted the exact same way.
Let's just TLDR this exactly. So they need to be formatted the same way. You've said that. Yeah. That's the first point. That makes it easier to read, easier to understand the segments and how they tie together and correlate, and how the documents correlate, right? But then there's also an aspect of congruency that you've said, right? If I'm an assessor and I'm reading your policy and your implementation notes don't align, I have to bet which one's accurate and how do they actually map. Now you're making me do the work, Wayne, and correct me if I'm wrong, to think through, does this map, does it meet the compliance requirement, does it meet the governance, or what we're actually setting to do with this policy? So I think to your point, if they're formatted the same, that makes it easier to read and ascertain. And then if things are congruent, if you've looked at it, it shows that you've taken the work to ensure that the policy actually flows operationally. Is that a good TLDR so far?
Correct, right? And it also shows to the assessor that if your implementation notes and your policy match, right, then you've actually incorporated your policy into your daily operational process.
Yeah, you're probably doing it is the outcome in my brain.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And it does lend to that truthfulness. Not that you're being untruthful. It's just that sometimes we get ahead of ourselves and we think we need to put one thing down in an implementation note, but we're saying something completely different in the policy. Try not to second guess yourself, is my point. Yeah. And we have the policy examples up here. Make sure you have a clearly defined purpose for the policy, right?
Yep.
Why the organization has it, right? And what is it to be used for? Because that also bleeds into scope. So who does the policy apply to? And that, by the way, I didn't include everything on here, but it's employees, contractors, vendors, systems, devices. I mean, it could be, right? So you want to make sure that, keep in mind, this isn't for everybody that's currently in the organization either. Although I would argue,
depending on
probably is. We have to maybe retrain some of our folks, but we're also looking at new people coming into the organization, right? We want You want them to be able to read a policy and understand exactly what their guardrails are for that policy and how they need to operate inside of the organization. And that gets into the whole governance kind of conversation too. But purpose, scope, make sure that you have measurable statements, right?
Yes.
The other thing that I don't think we really take into consideration here, your policies can actually help you with measuring the effectiveness of the safeguards you have in place. If you're not measuring your safeguards, you don't have a security program.
Agreed.
You don't know whether or not they're working.
Yep, agreed.
Right? So, make sure that the measurements that you have set inside of your policy statements, make sure that they're aligned to mitigate your business risk that you've identified as well. Right?
And that
as
they're
much
reality,
as
right? And that they're what you are actually doing, that you can reflect those things. If you set a policy and a procedure that don't match, that can be a challenge too, right?
Well,
So
reality is my favorite because I've actually seen someone with a policy that required 2-person integrity. The problem was it was a solopreneur company, so there was no 2 people to fulfill said 2-person integrity. And compliance doesn't care how many hats you wear; you're still one person.
Correct. So let me give you another spin on that, right? So depending upon the organization, I have seen and I have made recommendations to folks, again, in conversations with them, make your policy where you want it to be in version 2. So let's assume everybody is baselined at version 1, right?
Okay.
When you're looking at your policy and your future, because we all do this, right? We all look towards the future where we want to be. I don't want to have to rewrite my policy after it's been implemented. I want to write my policy as the guideline for where I want the organization to move.
And then find exceptions to that policy and document them and deal with them. Is that the methodology?
And then right. So the other thing, I won't use myself in the third person, although I almost did.
You should. The other thing Wayne looks for when assessing.
Well, how I like to operate, truthfully, especially from a cybersecurity perspective, we're all moving so quick, so fast, so hard. We don't have time to look at everything all the time. I like processing by exception, right?
Agreed.
So I only want to look at my exceptions, things that flag an anomaly, things that are hanging out there that I know I need to work toward, or things that kind of catch my eye that are a deviation from a standard. So a standard process, as an example. Why is that important? Well, because again, we're all moving so quickly, so fast. When you look at the exceptions that are currently going on in your environment, you're a lot faster at picking them up. A lot faster, right? Hey, wait, Dom just did something silly. How do I know that? Because that's not following a process.
Exactly.
Right. Yep.
Right? So don't be afraid. Look, don't put yourself in a 10-year end state with your policy. Put yourself a year or a year.
The next
or
iterative
a year
step.
and a half.
Right? The next
Correct.
place you're heading, the next guidelines you have. And we did this before. I'll give you a great example. Not directly to any standard for this specific point, but we wanted to move towards 5.6 and 6.7 of CIS of having SSO and centralizing access control. The first year we said, at least let's centralize our MFA so that we have one identity driving the MFA for all of these third-party services. Next year, we're going to set it to be SSO to all of these services and fire anything that doesn't meet, change our business operations, things of that nature. So I think to your point, you should always be aware of where the puck needs to go next. And I think as long as your policy's at that next space and that you have measurable statements that tell you whether you've met them, and then you've now, let's tackle this third part, because we've said, hey, get your scope, get your policy in order. One thing we didn't specifically tackle in that first was also have version control so I can see you're actually changing it as things change, as business conditions, efforts, business systems change. So you had that in there as well. But now let's tackle this cybersecurity first culture, Wayne, because that's on that next slide we were going to tackle. What are your thoughts on what you've seen from that perspective and how that ties into an assessment?
Well, and honestly, it ties right back into the policies too, right? Because what you're setting up inside of the policies, again, are the guidelines for your employees to behave within the organization, not just your W-2, 1099 are also included there. Sometimes your vendor community as well, right? So when we're talking about employees, keep that in mind. You also, what we're getting at with respect to culture there, especially if you're being forward thinking inside of your policy, you're getting them in the mindset, hey, I know this is coming, right? You want them to be thinking about security right when they start working, all the way through to the end of the day, and even a little bit beyond, going, hey, wait a minute, it dawned on me, I just saw something I probably that we need to talk about, right? And if we want to make sure that they're having open, honest, non-shamed conversations.
Yeah.
Another topic of conversation, right? Where we're not holding people back from reporting mistakes, reporting what they're seeing, reporting the accidental click on whatever. Or let's be honest, if you see the business owner doing something they're not supposed to, hold them accountable. I realize it sometimes becomes difficult, but you know what? If the owner is committed to doing the right thing, what you should hear from them is, you're right, I messed up, I'm sorry, let me go back, I need to fix that.
Well,
right?
and this
Go ahead.
This brings us to before, and actually ties into kind of Paul Cox's comment, if we can bring it up. He says, in larger entities, there can be policies all over. How do you cat herd all different offices that may have a cybersecurity related policy but located in some other department, right? So is the question brought up from Paul. Great to see you. Also had several other comments in there from Ian Groves earlier saying, absolutely, we became an NCSC assured cyber provider 18 months ago, and it helped us talk to our clients better, right? But to Paul's question, when you get into governance, and this is something I know we wanted to tackle, maybe we're going out of order in slides, Wayne, but I like to define governance as the will of an entity. If an entity is to pour concrete at a job site every 30 minutes at the right amount of ash and mix and aggregate, and they want to do it, they're going to do it. And if they have a driver out, they'll have extra drivers. If they have a truck down, they'll have another truck. They'll build a service department. They'll maintain their own, have their own parts. They'll manage deals with other shops. They will make it happen so that the will of the company is done. Governance, in my mind, around cybersecurity, which is a newer term, at least in the conversation of NIST CSF and the conversation of CIS, including in its language. But when you talk about governance, governance is that same will being applied to using the security policies we've set and managing that. And back to Paul's point, and I think even to your point, Wayne, of governance has to go both directions too in some ways. Like, yes, there has to be the will of the company, but there has to be the feedback from the employees. There has to be the understanding of the business impact. There has to be how we need to change things and bi-directional education in that regard. So I'll let you just go on that, but Paul's question really triggered me on that governance conversation here.
Yeah, no, I get it, right? And that's absolutely true. So if multiple departments have different cyber-related policies that are all saying the same thing but contradicting themselves, that's not healthy for the organization, right? And that's the challenge. Now, I'm not saying a different department can't have more restrict controls on their policy, right? But it should never contradict what's going on for the rest of the organization or the other departments, right? If you're working in finance or you're working in a what's another really good example? Here, let's just use
marketing with, let's say, mostly public data or something of that nature by comparison, right?
Right. Marketing data is very good. Marketing data can also be intellectual property, by the way. We can argue that point later.
And it can be privacy information if we want to get really down the rabbit hole. But yeah, I digress.
But if we look at it from a different classification area, let's just focus on data, because that's how everybody that's listening will probably be able to relate better to this.
Sure.
So if we have critical information, we have internal only, never to be shared outside, it's just for us, and we have public information, right? So confidential, internal, and public. So if I'm working with confidential information and I'm in the finance department, right? Because I'm dealing with M&A activities, as an example, with other groups that we're looking to acquire, my marketing team has no reason to see that, right? My finance team that's responsible for that M&A activity has no reason to share that information outside of the entities that actually need that information. So, I mean, we could also broaden this a little bit too and say this is almost to the point of not just least privilege, but also least functionality, right? Those two privileges as we're referring to policy. Where things go sideways, I think, is when the organization says, well, now IT is going to have confidential information and they're going to create a separate policy and rules and guidelines around what does that mean to the organization. Truth be told, confidential information within the organization should be handled and treated the exact same way regardless of the department it's in, right? So just because IT is not allowed to share with finance their confidential and vice versa, doesn't mean that the same policy doesn't apply to both those entities, right? And so when we think about writing policy statements specifically, we need to be thinking broad, general. And if we need to get specific, we have to remember rule 1, and that is be as general as possible so that we can encapsulate the entire organization. Right?
Let me ask a dumb question, but that also could be another asset type class, right? It could be another data type class. Like let's say we have confidential, but now let's say we're handling CUI, right? Or controlled unclassified information. That might be a different class that anyone that handles that class would have those stringent of requirements upon it. Does that make sense? Is that a fair way to also add that the class delineation can be where that is, and as long as that's general, that still applies across, like confidential is confidential to your point, but CUI is CUI to your point in the same way?
Right, yes, correct. And the other thing I would say about policy, avoid putting specific technology inside of your policy.
Amen.
Right?
Make it a reference document.
Right. So I just talked about make them general yet measurable statements that apply to the entire org. Because what happened, and I brought this up on one of my assessments with a group just a couple of weeks ago. What happens if you just are fed up with Microsoft? Sorry, Microsoft, I'm going to pick on you for a second. You're fed up with Microsoft 365 and you switch to become a Google Business Suite shop. What have you just done? If you have Microsoft 365 reference in your policy.
You have to make policy revisions directly in the policy document. You have to make sure that every statement's true. And I think what you're getting at is, for the most part, try to name the technology type class that you're going to use and reference those things in supporting documents now can be changed.
We just went through this exercise at PAX 8, right? I sat on the stakeholder group for a data classification scheme because, frankly, it had been a year and it had gotten more complicated. So we worked together and we have a lot of data types, but all of those data types are broad across the entire global organization. So me and my department, I can declare a certain type of data as HCI or highly confidential, and Matt, you might declare some of your data just internal, right? But no matter what, it has the same set of controls, and it's only defined as far as this data type needs to be encrypted. But then the sort of IT processes in PAX 8 that can change and more flexibly dictate how it's encrypted.
Right, and that's the other thing. So make sure that your policies also reference other policies where applicable, right?
No duplicity is your point.
Policies inside a policy, because if you change the owning policy, you're gonna have to. It's a lot more work, right?
So I'm guessing you've seen some that have nested policies that repeat stuff that then do the same thing. And so your advice of this is don't do that. Yeah. Work smarter, not harder. Yeah.
Work smarter, not harder. And then also, it's okay. Do not put your process inside a policy. That's not the proper place for it.
Preach it.
Very different documents.
I'll go get my choir robes.
Process and procedure needs to be a separate doc, because you're going to modify that multiple times throughout the year too. The challenge with editing policies more frequently than annually is that it becomes you lose track of which policy is relevant, current.
It can also be a problem in measurement period type models, right? Like if you're talking about a SOC 2 where you have a measurement period that you're looking at for a SOC 2 type 2 or something of that nature. So I think I agree with you on that, and the more you can keep from having to be changed in the policy but more in the procedure and process aspect of it.
Efficacy.
Go ahead, Dom.
Like if you use a product and the privacy policy has changed 6 times this year, you either stop using it because that's annoying and you don't trust them anymore, or you just have no idea what's on the privacy policy. And the same applies with our employees. If we've put out AUP 2024-4-2, nobody's read that. Nobody has any idea what's in that AUP. They're just burnt out.
Right. right? And make sure that you keep the language readable for the reader, right?
Yeah.
Don't leave
And for the
any
assessor,
room for,
right?
and the assessor,
Yeah,
but don't
both
leave any room
sides.
for ambiguity. That was really the other thing that I've seen is a lot of ambiguity inside of the policies, which is why I'm preaching the measurable statements, right? Because when you make them measurable, you lose that ambiguity.
And measurable kills you two ways, though. I want to touch on this real quick, and then I want to give a topic from Paul Cox. But measurement and measurable can hurt you too. And I'd love your thoughts on this, because great to be able to say, I will show evidence that I collect this once a month. Great. Unless you collect it every 3 months, and you didn't. And so I think, to your point of measurable, you want to make sure that the things you are setting for measurability are attainable. Right? If I say I must do this every time a new employee is hired within 5 days, all I have to look for as an assessor, one time you did not, right? To fail the must clause. And I think it's just about, in my mind, don't be aspirational. And that's what I meant earlier of don't be super aspirational above what you can actually measure. And when you set measurable things, set them within the confines of what you're trying to meet, to your point, Wayne, earlier about making it, to tomorrow's iteration. But also make sure that the measurability isn't going to hang you with your own policy document. Is something to bring up.
That's true, except remember this. If you're using those measurable statements to determine the effectiveness, and the effectiveness is based upon you mitigating the risk to the business, and you're failing to achieve that objective, don't just move the goalpost.
Okay.
Figure out what's
glad for that clarification. Yes, thank you. Good. We're on the same page.
Right. So I'm glad you brought that up, right? Because this isn't an exercise of just continuing to move the goalpost, or, as we were joking in the green room before the show started, checking a box, right? This is continuous monitoring, continuous improvement that you need to make sure you're doing inside of your organizations every single day of every year you're still in business, right?
Yep.
And it has to be in there from the oldest employee to the newest, from the tippy top all the way down to the newest employee, and laterally inside of your organization. Everybody is involved in ensuring success.
What's interesting about this is, anybody ever worked in the industrial fields where you have lockout tags, right? Lotto tags, lockout, tag out type methodologies. Yeah. Well, that gets followed almost universally. Almost everywhere I've ever been, at least without dead half humans laying around, right? Almost everywhere I've been, they follow those things. We as companies are used to this. We just haven't applied it to our technology process yet, Wayne. In a lot of cases, a lot of compliance and measurement of governance is because we haven't done those same things in our business operations.
You brought that out, ITIL, right? If you think about ITIL and the sheer lack of application of ITIL in most small IT organizations. Yeah. Things like, because change control is kind of a pain, right? If you have a problem and you need to go through a CAB or a change control process to fix a firewall rule, you're going to be annoyed because you haven't yet fully understood the why. What does change control actually do for me?
Sure.
Besides slowing
or
me down?
automated the ways you can make it work for you in a scalable way, right? And to those points as well. I do want to tackle, Paul Cox said something cool real quick. We'll pop up, Wayne.
Yeah.
And he just said, once you get very specific, policies should be separated out from implementing procedures. Yes, 100%, right? Refer to this appendix. Here's the procedure for this policy, right? To your point. Wayne, what are your thoughts on that? Anything else to add?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't leave your policy document alone. Put your processes in a standard operating procedure separate and aside from that document.
Link to it, to your point.
Don't make appendices.
Just link it directly in the policy. Yeah.
Right. No, do not put it direct, because then you have to version the policy anytime you make change to the appendix. That goes against everything that we kind of just talked about, right? Try to avoid doing that. All policies should be reviewed annually, right? And they could be on staggered schedules. It doesn't have to be January 1st of every year, right? Yep. Stagger your policy reviews out.
It shouldn't be January 1st of every year.
Right, correct. It should not be January 1st or December 31st. Take your pick, right? If you stagger them out, then you're able to carry your security awareness training, because your policies are part of your security awareness training as well. You can stagger that throughout the year too. So it's always this constant flow, constant reminder of what's going on, and you're not overwhelming your staff either. I want to
and
touch back on
that's
something.
the big point about like breaking it up, right? Is not I'm not throwing
Yes.
all 36 information security policies at my people every year to go through and initial or click wrap or whatever.
Like making it all year
Right.
thing.
Think about the time wasted there, right? Anyway, that you're supposed to be working, right, the business. Anyway, you had mentioned something, and now I just lost my train of thought. I pulled a Matt.
It happens. I do it frequently. We'll continue. We'll come back to you.
Yeah, we'll come back to it. So let's talk about some of the other. We'll talk about some of the other things, and I'm sure it'll pop back into my head. Network diagrams. Detailed network diagrams are your friend. I don't care if you're even a 100% cloud shop, right? The goal here is from an assessor. An assessor can actually learn a lot about your organization and the controls you have in place by looking at your network diagram if it contains key elements of information. The systems, the segmentation, right? Whether it's logically or physically separated.
Sure.
I'll say it that way, right? As well as your ingress egress points. Documenting what's going on where in each of the segments is good information too to also include in there.
Yeah, that gets into data flow more than the other, right? Like the first part is
that's where I'm going
architecture,
next, right?
Yeah.
So the data flow doesn't have to be a part of your network diagram per se.
Correct.
It can be separate. But here's my suggestion to folks. A lot of experience goes behind this one. Write your network diagram in a way that you can actually overlay your data flow. Because you may find that when you do that, you may find some challenges that you have inside of your network that you didn't even know existed before.
Yeah.
So what do we mean by data flow, Matt?
Like where the data originates, is born, and dies, and all the places it's connected to. Like ultimately, like it's all of the things, which SaaS software it's flowing in, which local software, where it was stored, where it came from. Maybe I've been over specific, but where the data goes, Wayne.
So, right. So for all of the folks on here that have dodged the CMMC bullet, stored, processed, or transmitted in your environment, right?
Yep.
And that's mainly for your stuff. However, the one big exception that I know everybody has, or almost everybody has, are the backups that are currently being managed by the MSP on behalf of the client. Because I would be willing to bet a box of donuts that you probably have client-sensitive information, whether FCI, CUI, I don't care, intellectual property, that's under your direct management and control from a privilege layer standpoint inside of your backup.
And Wayne, is this very specific to an, I mean, not very specific, there's a lot of cases, but to an MSP of, that is your data in some cases, the stuff you are holding for a client, whether it be the configuration data under SPD or security protection data, whether it be the actual backup data themselves. And a lot of the things that need to be, I would want to see from an assessment would be, have you addressed the encryption and management of that particular data flow commensurate with the data and where it originated, right? Because it's not all yours. This is now client data you may have downgraded the sensitivity upon for something that was already set to a higher sensitivity for them. So that's a weird one, right? Because MSPs are uniquely in that position as service providers. How much does that come up in your assessment?
The hell out of me was like the customer emails you a ticket, and they've taken a screenshot, and there's 10 tax returns sitting on the damn desktop so that they could show me the little weird thing in the corner. Or they've emailed me an email chain with medical records, and all that stuff terrified me because it was sitting in tables in the PSA.
Yeah.
Correct. Yep. Oh no, absolutely. So you have to be, again, you have to make sure that you're aware, and those are some interesting use case examples that organizations, if that struck a bell or a nerve with you, you may want to go back and make sure that you have the right process around securing those kind of things. But if we just talk about backup for a second, that was the one thing that scared the bejesus out of me with the whole CMMC and the level 2 stack, right? But that's a whole other conversation. The other thing, privacy data. So for those of you that are not right? I put a link here on my slide for the MINTS matrix. If you're not aware or you have dealings, let's say, and this just happened the other day, I had a Pennsylvania MSP who also has clients in Ohio and Indiana, and they did not know the privacy statute notification law around whether or not they were a covered entity in those other states. As it turns out, the guidance that they had for the state of Pennsylvania was also incorrect based upon what MINTS had published for that state, and because it didn't dictate in the covered entity status whether or not you're required to notify. By revenue, they thought that there was a revenue limit as well as an employee limit. So I would strongly recommend that.
And a revenue
right. So if you have less than 50 employees, you don't have to. If you have less than 25 million in revenue, you don't have to. But I would strongly recommend and encourage, because these laws are changing all the time, right?
Yes, they are.
And MINTS does a really great job of keeping up to date on them for the U.S. If there's anybody outside of the U.S., obviously you have GDPR.
And what is privacy information, just for everybody out there? If you think about it, and I like to describe it as, it's stuff you don't own. It's my private data that I've let you borrow to be able to index me in your system and manage it. And you've collected it, and therefore you have some requirements to protect it from a fiduciary perspective that are changing every day, to your point, Wayne, of that risk.
And it varies by state, too, on what's considered personal information and what's not.
Yep.
So
and
you
countries,
really have to
right? To your point, Wayne, you're working with 39 or so countries for this Trustmark. So, yeah. So it's different all over the place. The other thing you call out here is third-party vendor management and third-party risk, service provider management, that you see as something that people need to pay attention to. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I will tell you, most MSPs today do not and are not going to get a meets on the 4 or 5 safeguards that are currently in the Trustmark. They'll probably have the one where they're maintaining contractual oversight for the vendors, right? But as far as understanding some of the other key elements that are in there with doing the third-party vendor risk management, we're actually going to have a tool by which you can do that in Q1 launch with our partners over at Channel Program. So we're helping to provide a lot of that, because honestly, there's no real easy way to do third-party vendor risk management the way you should be doing it right from the get-go. And bring it down to the channel level to where it's actually very affordable. Right?
Well, it's not scalable for the vendors, right? The other challenge is vendors trying to scale it, get a different request from each person. There's no normalization of that, so everybody's asking in a different way. And so I think what you're working on, and I've met some of the humans doing it, it's a very good work product of trying to say, what are those minimum level of requirements you should be tracking with third-party vendors? And let's just get everybody on the same page so that vendors can prepare easily, so that you can prepare easily. And so I really like that that's being defined pretty well there. So that's one of those where we're kind of trying to give you a freebie a little bit, if you will, from the, at least putting on my working group hat for CompTIA, that's one of those freebies.
Future state.
So what's that?
Future
state. Yeah. Future state. Yeah. Today, at least it is getting started there. And to your point, and we haven't tackled seeing a WISP or seeing some type of system security plan that brings it all together. So it sounds like that may be a gap, or some of the things where the people that have done well have brought that. Is that something you want to speak on?
Yeah, because the cool part about this particular document set, it's not just the controls. Let me, because I've had some folks tell me they've got a written information security plan or a system security plan, and it turns out it's nothing more than the controls and how they believe that they've implemented it. But the interesting side, when I looked at one in particular, it was the control and what should have been there, but it didn't tell me what they had actually done to do it, right? And that's the whole point behind the WISP and the system security plan. The first part of the system security plan and the WISP should be you talking through your entire organization, right? How do you have the security safeguards set up? And we're not talking about down to the nitty-gritty level, right? We're talking about, from a general holistic standpoint, the security program that you're starting to put in place today as an organization. And again, the state of security as it exists today this is where it deviates from policy, that exists today inside of your organization. Now, this is one document that you absolutely need to keep up with. It's a living document, so any changes you make to your overall organization and environment, including your network, your applications, your systems, right? You need to then update this document so that it accurately reflects the organization as it exists today. Again, it's only a snapshot, right? And so we, just keep that in mind. But it's a good snapshot to know where we were, what our baseline was, and how we've actually started to mature our organization.
And to not beleaguer the time we have for this, but do you see people using the system security plan as a bridgehead document that matches up to that policy and process and procedure as almost this kind of linear progression, right? You have your WISP or system security plan that sets the state of the union, where we are, what the governance is that's going to be over it. You then step into policies and procedures that should support where that is or where it's going, and then those tie into the process and procedure. Is that a pretty effective thing you're seeing? Yeah. Tells the story, right?
Yeah,
the way I say it.
Correct. Absolutely. And believe me when I tell you, out of the 14 that I've done, I've only seen one system security plan that was actually written correctly.
Yeah, I would imagine. And even correct to the understanding of its purpose, not even just syntaxically or taxonomically, really just like, did they tell the story of where this system is, what the broad governance is? As an assessor, is this setting the story, almost like a preamble for me of what I'm about to step into? Is that what you're looking for, Wayne, just to maybe cap this
Yes,
off?
no, absolutely, right. And for those that support government contracts, you already know what a system security plan looks like, right?
Hopefully.
And so it just,
or you've been lying about 171 for like 9 years.
If you're looking to get into that game, I would strongly recommend that you work on developing a very strong system security.
LinkedIn told me to just set my Spurs score to the max. Just go do it. So
yeah, I just maxed out my Spurs score. I won.
Just set it in there. It's no big deal.
Anyways, that's a great way to wrap this up. All right, I think we're great. Wayne, what if you were to just get one moment to speak to, and there's quite a few people on right now, it looks like, but one moment to speak to, should they just start submitting it and figure it out, or do they need to work a lot on all the things you said before they get going on the Trustmark? How would you start?
Yeah. Right. So the fun part about the program that we've put together, Matt's help, a lot of others that I'm sure are listening in on the call that are available right now, the community is here to help. We want you to just get into the program because we can actually help you build it right the first time, rather than you trying to go down a path and building it on your own and then having to go back and readjust stuff. It's a lot easier when we can take greenfield and actually start building a neighborhood, right? So we can help you be more successful in doing it. And if you've already started, that's okay too. Just jump in, and we're all here to help. We're all in this together. We all want to move this industry in the right direction and avoid the trunk slammers, right, Matt?
Yeah, pretty much. And I think all you actually have to do is get on the program of getting better. You don't have to solve this tomorrow. We didn't solve being MSPs tomorrow. We didn't solve how to be more efficient using an RMM and having things with standards and TAMs and alignment people and people that do this function and then VCI. We didn't do all that overnight, right? So I think the point is, Wayne, just get started and then continue to grow. I think some of these examples are having a WISP, thinking about where your security is, not being aspirational, but rather being incremental in the things you're doing. Make sure you have measurable and clear results. Understand your data flows and network designs, right? So some of those things. So I think that's pretty much it. But anything you want to close us out with, Wayne or Dom?
Go ahead, Dom. I've talked enough.
No, I think you nailed it. But I do think this is not a scary thing, right? It is genuinely something built to help you grow, to help you add maturity, to help you add capabilities to your own security stack. So when you hear the word assessment, and it has nothing to do with the Department of Defense, you don't really need to be that nervous, right? Like, work through it, be collaborative. If it has to do with DoD, I'm gonna tell you to be nervous. That's a nerve-wracking assessment.
That's fair.
But when it comes to Trustmark, I would say check it out. Let's do it. Let's make it a standard, and let's raise the tide. And perhaps the barrier to entry, if we're being honest, right?
Yep. Exactly. Hey, guys, again, thank you so much for having me on. I hopefully the audience got a lot out of this and can at least better prepare, make some decisions, have another look at their own environment, and make the changes that they need to if they're not where they want to be, and get to where they need to be.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. Wayne,
Well,
thank you so much for joining us. Now it's time for the play of the day. Before I give it to you, Matt, just want to point out that Sandy, our friend, the Canadian national treasure,
the great
got
Sandy
done in about
McGrath.
45 seconds. Just saying. So,
Oh man, I can't do it in 45 seconds. It's taking me at least a minute. All right, fine. I won't be as
let's
cool
go
as
to the play of the
Sandy. Let's
game.
do it. Give me a minute, y'all. Let's do play of the game. All right, the play of the game is, hey, listen, having to meet a standard's coming. It's what you've asked for. It's what you want. It's what MSPs are saying will help us fix our industry, keep the prices where they make sense, make sure that we are not completely commoditized. And as you go down that path, when we look at being assessed and finding some standard that you're adhering to, you're not going to get there overnight. You're going to have to go through work. You're going to have to work through making actual effort into what you're doing. And as you're doing that and you're working on being assessed, try to find a framework that has assessments that help you raise the tide over time. And make sure when you're writing your assessments that they're clear, they're to the point, they're measurable, they tell a story, and they drive towards what you said you're going to meet. And remember, it's all about you, not your clients. Although sometimes having your client's data can impact how risky it is to you. So in this case, I'm going to sit here and burn the next 12 seconds because I have that prerogative. And I will say that I'm not going to be as good as the great Sandy McGrath, but you should start doing Trustmark assessments and see where you are and where you measure up.
Game over.
All right, maybe not 45 seconds, but a minute on the nose is pretty damn good, so we'll take it. We are not going to have a show next week. We're going to take a little break. There's a lot going on around here at PAX 8, but we will be back on November 13th, so don't forget to join us then. Catch all the other PAX 8 live shows in between. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe. Check out Security Bootcamp. Do check out Beyond 25 because, as you may imagine, we're already planning that, so definitely check it out. And that's our show. We'll see you next time.